Hello, thank you for joining me today for another time of Bible study. For today's lesson, I want to spend a little bit of time with you on Psalm 127. This is a psalm that is attributed to Solomon. And it says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman keeps awake in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to retire late, to eat the bread of painful labors, for he gives to his beloved even in his sleep. Behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. How blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be ashamed when they speak with their enemies in the gate." Well, that's a beautiful psalm, a very familiar one. And I want to share some thoughts with you today about this great passage of Scripture. The fundamental truth of Psalm 127 is that the Lord is responsible for every human success or achievement. We as human beings are wholly dependent on God in every phase of our lives. And because of that, we should give God the credit. We should seek His will in everything that we do. But in the first part of this psalm, in verses 1 and 2, there is a warning, if you will. There is a dose of reality about the work that we do here on this earth. 3 times in these first 2 verses, the psalmist uses the word vain, and he is describing human pursuits as empty if they are carried on without the Lord. They will be fruitless and ultimately unfulfilling if God is not our priority and our trust in everything. So in the first part of verse 1, here's the idea of the work of building a house. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. And so the project is doomed to failure unless God supports it. God builds the house, of course, in the sense that He gives man the strength and the time and the skill and the resources to carry it off. But the main point really is that the man must not leave God out of any undertaking. No matter how insignificant it appears to him, it will not survive without God's approval and His support. The story of the Tower of Babel in the book of Genesis chapter 11 is a good illustration of this. It's a story, of course, that ends in disaster. The greatest work project in the ancient world there failed because they built for their own glory and security. God was not in their plans, and so it failed. They worked in vain because the Lord was not with them. And so we know that without God we are nothing. But the psalmist also pictures for us the work of striving to provide security when he goes on to say in verse 1 that unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman keeps awake in vain. So here is the watchman who roams up and down the section of the city wall assigned to him. He's looking for signs of approaching danger from outside. But the passage just says that the city is never going to be safe unless the Lord has determined that it will be safe, that the Lord has determined that the city will not fall to the enemy. And then the third picture here is the picture of long, hard work and painful labors. And so he says it is vain for you to rise up early, to retire late, to eat the bread of painful labors, for he gives to his beloved even in his sleep. Getting up early, working hard all day and into the night, going to bed late, and then getting up and doing it all over again the next day. You know, all of us can relate to these words, can we not? We do all this to ultimately eat the bread of sorrows and anxious toil. But he says this too is vain. It reminds us of other words that the wise preacher in Ecclesiastes said, echoing these same thoughts. He says in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, For what does a man get in all his labor and in his striving with which he labors under the sun? Because all his days his task is painful and grievous. Even at night his mind does not rest. This too is vanity. Now, this does not mean that projects like these, like building houses and providing security or working hard, are wrong. They're not bad things at all. In fact, the Scripture is quite consistent in teaching the nobility of work. Work is intended to be a good thing, a noble thing for us as human beings to do. If you go back to the very beginning, when God created all things in 6 days, His creation is described as His work. And so in the second chapter of Genesis, it says that God rested from His work on the seventh day, and then He blessed and sanctified the seventh day. And then later, of course, when the law of Moses was given, the Sabbath law was instituted as part of that covenant to be a time of cessation from work to turn to God. And also we know in Scripture that from the very beginning, man was created for the purpose of work. He was given responsibility. In Genesis 2:15, the man was to cultivate and keep the Garden of Eden in which he was placed. So God designed man from the very beginning to be responsible and to engage in activities that are productive. So there's great value in learning the dignity of hard work. And I really believe that young people should learn the value of accepting responsibility and working hard. And they should learn it early in life. Lamentations 3 says it's good for a man that he should bear the yoke in his youth. And we as Christians in the New Testament are taught how important honest work is, that it's really part of ethical moral conduct, just as much as being truthful or exercising self-control or being pure in our speech. The Apostle Paul in Ephesians 4 says that he who steals must steal no longer, but rather he must labor, performing with his own hands what is good, so that he'll have something to share with one who has need. The apostle goes on to teach about servants in their relationship with their masters. And what he ends up saying is that servants in their relationship with the Lord demands that they make sure that their service is done in the proper manner, even when they're serving their earthly master. He says it should be done not by way of eye service, as men pleasers, but as servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. Ephesians chapter 6. The same thing in Colossians chapter 3. He says, whatever you do, do your work heartily, as for the Lord rather than for men. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. Hard work, it's a valuable thing. It's a noble calling for us, and it pays rich dividends in our relationships in society, in our communities, and in the Lord's church. And so Paul, in writing to the church in Thessalonica, for example, 1 Thessalonians 4, says to make it your ambition to lead a quiet life, and attend to your own business, and work with your hands, so that you will behave properly toward outsiders and not be in any need. All of this is good, you see. Work is a noble thing. But the point of the statements here in Psalm 127 is this, and it is that all of man's labor in this life ultimately is vanity. It's vain if it is done for its own sake only, apart from honoring God. And furthermore, the psalmist reminds us that the Lord is really the great provider. As he says at the end of verse 2, for he gives to his beloved even in his sleep. But the remainder of Psalm 127 is a further reminder that there are certain things in life that have greater value than the things that he has spoken of. And so in verse 3 he says, behold, children are a gift of the Lord. He says, the fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. How blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be ashamed when they speak with their enemies in the gate. He says children are a gift of the Lord. And raising a family is one of life's greatest blessings. And we should not lose sight of the fact that having children, raising a family are like the other things that He has spoken of. They are successful and profitable only through God's help. This doesn't mean that it's easy. It's a great responsibility. Requires a lot of effort. And really in keeping with everything that He has said about building houses and bringing about security and engaging in hard work, our work as parents and guardians of our children can only be successful if we look to Him and His principles of righteousness. The same principle applies, you see, to this aspect of life. But what the psalmist is really doing here is he is pointing us to the truth that the character of our work here on earth is shaped ultimately not by worldly accomplishments or earthly possessions, but in our relationships. What is most important in life are people, the relationships that we develop with them, and the good that we do for them. And family is the epitome of the value of relationships. And family reminds us of things in life that have the greatest value. And with that idea, when we think about Jesus' work on earth during His earthly ministry, it was of such great value, wasn't it? It was the greatest work that any man has ever engaged in. Why was it valuable? It was valuable because it involved people. It involved those whom He made His sons and daughters and His brothers and sisters in a spiritual way. Jesus spoke of the work that He was sent to accomplish. In John chapter 4, He said, "My food is to do the will of Him who sent me and to accomplish His work." He said in John 9 and verse 4, "We must work the works of Him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work." And in the 17th chapter of John and verse 4, in His prayer shortly before He was crucified, He said, "I glorified you on the earth, having accomplished the work which you have given me to do." And then Jesus sent out His disciples. He sent His followers out to labor in His harvest, to engage in that same work. Luke chapter 10, He said, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into His harvest." You see, the Lord's work was the greatest of all work, and He wants us as His followers to be engaged in that work too. The work of the Lord is the work of His disciples. And, echoing the words of the Apostle Paul to the Corinthians, we need to be busy and we need to be steadfast in doing that work. And so Paul said there in 1 Corinthians 15, "Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your toil is not vain in the Lord." So you see, the greatest blessings come from the Lord. That's what Psalm 127 is reminding us about. And our prosperity, our security, our work, and our families, all of these have meaning and value only when they are pursued with the Lord and His will in mind. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it.